We call to order this special called meeting of the Bristol, Virginia City Council today, Tuesday, December 20th, 2022. Please join us for a moment of silence. Please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Thank you all for coming out and to join us this evening. We have a short agenda, but an important one. So first, we'll look for a motion to adopt our agenda this evening.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. A motion and a second to adopt our agenda. Clerk, please call the roll.
Hartley,
Yes.
Nave,
Yes.
Osborne,
Yes.
Wingard,
Yes.
Farnham.
Yes. Okay, our first item is the presentation of the June 30th, 2022 audit report. And with us tonight, we have Mr. Gordon here, so we'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. It's good to be with you all this evening. My name is Gordon Jones, and I'm the partner in charge of the audit from Robinson Farmer Cox Associates. We've got this presentation, but before we get into that, I would like to point out the reports that we issue as part of your financial statements. There are 3 reports. The first one's on page 9, continues to page 12 of your financial statements. It's the independent auditor's report. It's a clean, unmodified report, highest level of assurance you can receive. Within that report, we do talk about a couple emphasis of matters issues. You can read about those in the notes to the financial statements. We also talk about the adoption of GASB 87, dealing with leases. Just to alert the reader, these are important aspects of the report. You may need to read into this further. The second report that we issue as part of your financial statements is on pages 137, 138. This is our report on internal control and on compliance performed in accordance with government auditing standards, sometimes referred to as a Yellow Book report. We do report one material weakness related to the landfill, a weakness that has been on the books prior to RFC's arrival. So that finding has to do with the fact that the landfill doesn't generate enough money to sustain, to pay for everything that it needs to pay for. There's a large amount of negative net position there, and that's why that finding is reported. Similar to what's been reported for the past few years. Any questions on that? The last report is our report on compliance for each major program and on the internal control over compliance required by the uniform guidance. It's the single audit report. It's required when you expend federal funds in excess of $750,000, which the city does. It's a clean, unmodified report. Nothing negative reported in that report. Any questions? All righty, I'll turn my attention to the presentation. Just flip on to page 2. This is our communication to those charged with governance. It's a summary of the audit process. It talks about the adoption of GASB 87, Governmental Accounting Standards Board Statement Number 87, dealing with leases. Talks about estimates. It talks about uncorrected misstatements, one of which had to do with the opioid settlement, sorry. And this number came into the city late. It's an estimate. It's below tolerable misstatement, which is a number we calculate, so we decided not to book it for this fiscal year. It also reports some of those other matters that we reported in the independent auditor's report. Any questions about that letter? Guess I should be flipping forward here. This is an equity analysis. The city's books are kept on two different bases of accounting. The first one is the full accrual basis. It's at the top under the blue. Modified accrual basis is at the bottom. Net position for the city is at $19.5 million, reporting positive balances for all three of those categories. Unrestricted net position at about $7.2 million. You can see that 5 years ago it was about negative $12.2 million. So that's a $20 million swing over that 5-year period. Pretty incredible. Under the orange heading there, that's Exhibit 3 in the report. This is the modified accrual basis of accounting. It's more of a short-term perspective. Typically, when you look to a city to see how well or poorly they're doing, you look at these numbers. Under the modified accrual basis of accounting, you report fund balance. Fund balance for all governmental activities, including the general fund, is about $57.6 million. That includes the construction project, $24.7 million for the new school, and that's included in that restricted amount of $24.9 million, almost $25 million. The city has restricted funds of about $4.8 million. Those are reserves and debt reserves. And your unrestricted balance at about $26.6 million. That's about a $12 million improvement over 5 years ago. It's a $4,300,000 or so improvement from the previous fiscal year. Probably a good time to have those extra funds as we figure out what to do with the landfill. We're often asked how much fund balance do you need to have, so we calculate that based on the governmental expenditures of the city and the school board. Total fund balance at it's $62 million, but that includes those restricted funds. Without that, it's about 35%, 62% and 35%. Consistent with where it was from the previous year. Unassigned fund balance at 29% of that number. Both healthy numbers for the city. And again, that's the governmental side. It excludes the solid waste fund. You might wonder, in that unassigned fund balance, does that include the ARPA funds that you're holding there? It does not. That revenue is deferred until you expend it. So that is without those ARPA funds. Any questions about that? Over on page 6, this is the statement of net position for the solid waste fund. As healthy as the governmental side looks, the solid waste fund is in the opposite direction and doesn't look very good. Total net position for the landfill or solid waste fund at negative $26.4 million. And it's been negative for all of those 5 fiscal years. Not improvement. I think the biggest driver of that decrease over that 5-year period is the fact that principal is not being paid down as quickly as the assets they generated are being depreciated. So you've got assets being depreciated quicker than the debt is being paid off. So that's what's driving a lot of that decrease in fund balance, if you will, or net position. Any questions about that? The city also has a transit fund. It's an enterprise type activity, reports net position of $143,000. Over on page 8, if I can remember the clicker here. It's page 8. This is 5 years of data for the general fund. General fund is the main operating fund for the city. When you look at an income statement for a locality, you typically look at the general fund to see how well or how poorly they're doing. You can see from this increase in fund balance all the way at the bottom is about $28.8 million. That includes the $24.7 million of issuance of debt proceeds for the new school. If you take that away, the general fund increased by about $4.1 million in fund balance. It's a good number. That ending fund balance of $57.5 or $6 million includes those construction funds, so probably not a good number to look at there. But if you look at the cash, the ending cash balance for the general fund, about $28.8 million. And again, over that 5-year period, if you look back to 2018, general fund unrestricted cash was about $13.3 million. So cash in the general fund has increased $15 million over that 5-year period. So it's really a tale of two different funds, really. I mean, you've got the governmental funds, the city, the general fund looks healthy, and then you got the solid waste fund, which is 180 degrees the other direction. We do a calculation of reserves over on page 9. If you look at the general fund balance as a percentage of those expenditures of the city and the school board, it's about $38.6 million as opposed to that $67.5, which includes those construction funds. Cash balance at about 33.8% of those expenditures, both healthy numbers for the general fund. Any questions about that? We put some pie charts together just for the fun of it. It allows you to see visually what revenues made up the general fund 5 years ago as opposed to the current year. Not a whole lot of change there. On the revenue side, your other local taxes are increasing. It was 25% of the total 2018, 29% 2022. Expenditures at the bottom, not a whole lot of change there. Public works 5 years ago was, public safety was 29%. This year it's 27%. Same type of information on these next. This is the general fund revenues by fiscal year. Major revenues on the left, your smaller minor revenues on the right. Nothing too riveting about that. Over on page 12, you have expenditures for the general fund over that 5 fiscal year period in a bar graph. Public safety is the larger one. Health and welfare, which includes social services, CSA is a smaller one, and then education is the third one down there. The last thing here are debt amounts for the city. I like to show this, particularly this year because of the adoption of GASB 87. Dealing with leases, the city's had GASB 87 lease liabilities of $2.7 million, finance purchases of $630,000. Those are both in the interest-bearing category at the top. Your other long-term liabilities, most of these are estimates. Not all of them are estimates, but the bigger ones, like the net pension liability, decreased from $24.4 million down to $10.2. It's a pretty large decrease there due to the stock market, the investments, and how they were doing a year ago when this thing is measured. It's measured a year behind the current fiscal year, so it's measured as of June 30th, 2021. Liabilities for the solid waste fund. Your general obligation, $34.2 million. In 2018, they were 34.9. So they've decreased 800,000 or thereabout over that 5-year period. I'm sure the assets related to that have depreciated a lot more than that. So that's why, the net position is decreasing over that 5-year period. It has a lot to do with it. That solid waste fund has some leases, $812,000. The landfill closure, post-closure liability, $12.8 million. There are some debts related to the transit fund. Some of those net pension liabilities and OPEB liabilities get allocated to that fund as well. Over on page 14, school board debts included. You can see that their net pension liability decreased from $22 million down to $12.5. Their total liabilities, most of those non-interest-bearing liabilities, $21.4 million. The IDA has revenue bonds of $30.6 million. Total long-term obligations of the city about $220 million. Debt per capita at about $12,817. So each person in the city of Bristol owes $12,817 if you look at it that way. State averages for other cities at about $7,400. So city has quite a bit of debt. Lastly, Gatsby's not happy unless they're changing things, so it's pretty hard to keep up, to tell you the truth. But anyway, we've got some new standards coming down next year for 2023, or for the fiscal year we're currently in. It deals with conduit debt obligations. In the past, there's been some latitude on how you reported those debt, whether or not it was, in the case of the city, whether the IDA reported the liability or the city reported the liability. This standard will codify that and tell us exactly, tell us how to report that in the future. There's some other standards that are coming. Probably the bad one is statement number 96 over on page 18. And I can't read it. Yeah, that one. We refer to it as SABITAs. It's a subscription-based information technology arrangements similar to leases, GASB 87. So that'll be fun 2 years from now. We'll have to deal with that. Overall, the audit went well. We were lucky in that Ms. Spradlin had GASB 87 worked up prior to her departure, so that made things easier for Ms. Jennings. We don't do the audit for the school board, but everyone that we work with here at the city is great to work with, whether it's social services or the finance department, or the treasurer's office. They're all great people to work with. We don't have any issues getting information when we need it. And I'll conclude with that. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer your questions.
Well, if there's no questions from any of us up here, I just want to say thank you for your time, your dedication. We've worked with you before, and we appreciate you giving us this, in a sense, a snapshot, a picture of where we are now and the previous years, where we've been. So it's great to look at that and compare. So well.
It's good to work with the city. I enjoy it.
Well, thank you so much. We appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
All right. Thank you. So we'll move into the next item of our agenda, which is the extension of the COVID-19 leave policy. A staff report.
Council, before you, we have to talk about COVID-19 again. It's something I don't think is going to go away anytime soon. And this past February, on February 8th of 2022, City Council approved a COVID-19 leave policy, and that policy went into effect on February 9th of 2022 and expired on June 30th of 2022. After some discussion in early June, Council extended the policy through December 31st of 2022 at its regularly scheduled meeting on June 14th of 2022. And since this policy is first implemented, 61 staff members have used a total of 2,266 hours of COVID leave. The city has seen an uptick of COVID cases recently, and there have been 7 positive cases since November 1st. That number actually may be 8 now. I think when we prepared this, we've gotten 1 other case since then. And so I'm asking council to extend this leave policy at least through June 30th. I think as we continue to move forward into the new year and through our budget cycle and things, we're going to have to look at leave for the city moving forward as CDC continues to require quarantine for people who are test positive with COVID. I think it's something that we need to do for employees, at least during the short term, until we can figure out a better solution. I think that anything is on the table as far as the solution goes on how to deal with COVID going on in the future. But For a hybrid employee only can carry over only can have 60 hours of leave time at any given time. I know of one employee right now who's probably expended if they were eligible, or if they had 60 hours of leave time. It's a new employee, and if they had 60 hours of leave time, they would have already expended that due to the severeness of the COVID case that this person has, and because this person's so new, they really don't have any sick time. And so we've got to figure out a happy medium going forward, and hopefully we can have a new policy in place by July 1 for that. I would also say that I have spoken with the 2 new incoming council members about this situation as well. They don't seem to have an issue with extending this COVID leave policy. I thought it was important to inform them, as it will impact them moving forward starting on January 3rd.
Okay. All right. Are there any questions, or is there a motion from the council?
I move for approval of the extension of the COVID leave policy.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second. Is there any questions or discussion for the city manager? I just wanted to say, I know there's a few different ways to look at it, and maybe not having a policy or not extending it. I don't ever want an employee to get sick and think, I still need to get into work. Obviously it's important when you are sick to try to, not spread it. So I think it's important to have it. We've done this before and don't see any issues with extending it. Hopefully it can help some of our employees. If there's no other questions or discussion, so we do have a motion and a second. So clerk, please call the roll.
Hartley,
Yes.
Nave,
Yes.
Osborne,
Yes.
Wingard,
Yes.
Farnham.
Yes. And just to let the record show that Mr. Osborne has been attending tonight remotely. So that's the last item of our agenda. So if there's no further business, we stand adjourned.